Namaste students. Hope all of you have watched the previous video of the angel in disguise. Only if you have watched the previous video, you will be able to understand the continuation part of it. Yes, welcome to English Literature Class 2. Let's move on to the next page in the lesson. Hope all of you have the textbooks in hand and you have held a pencil also to mark the important ones while I go on reading and explaining it to you along with the meanings of the words. Now let's move on to page 80 and we will see how the reaction of Mrs. Thompson was when she saw the little angel or Maggie in the hands or arms of Thompson. Now Joe Thompson's wife, who happened to be childless, was not a woman of saintly temper, very calm, nor much given to self-denial for others' good. Nor was she so good. She wasn't that sort of a person where she was too warm-hearted to anybody. And Joe had well-grounded doubts touching the manner of greeting he should receive on his arrival. Obviously, Joe knew about her temperament and he knew he did not actually expect a good welcome from his wife. He definitely knew what sort of mannerism of greeting he would receive when he would go to house, because he was not going as normally and regularly as he used to go. He's having a child, a handicapped child in his arms. Mrs. Thompson saw him approaching from the window and with ruffling feathers met him a few paces from the door. Ruffling feathers? She was really annoyed. She was very high in her temperament. And with ruffling feathers met him a few paces from the door as he opened the garden gate and came in. He bore a precious burden. You have to underline this word. This word becomes very important and it becomes very important for you to use it in your answers also. It is a burden. It's an oxymoron. It is a burden, but it is very precious. And obviously, we will understand how it turned to be a precious burden at the end of the story. And he felt it to be so. As his arms held the sick child to his breast, a sphere of tenderness went out from her and penetrated. He felt it went inside his feelings. A bond had already corded. They had already got connected with the bond itself around them both, and love was springing into life. So they had already corded. They were already tied up with the bond of love. What have you there? Sharply questioned Mrs. Thompson. Joe felt the child start and shrink against him. So he felt that the child was really scared with those words. She was shrinking in his arms. He did not reply, except by a look that was pleading and cautionary that said, "Wait a moment for explanations and be gentle." And passing in, carried Maggie to the small chamber on the first floor and laid her on a bed. Then, stepping back, he shut the door and stood face to face with his vinegar-tempered wife in the passageway outside. Vinegar-tempered? Bitter, a sour taste, bitter taste. You can make out the feeling of the wife there. He did not actually answer it to her. He said, "Be gentle, I will explain it to you later." And he just put her on a bed on the first floor in a small chamber. Chamber here also means a room. "You haven't brought home that sick brat." Anger and astonishment were in the tones of Mrs. Joe Thompson. Her face was in a flame. "I think women's hearts are sometimes very hard," said Joe. Usually, Joe Thompson got out of his wife's way or kept rigidly silent and non-combative when she fired up on any subject. So he thinks that maybe women's heart are a bit hard. And usually what happens in any argument, non-combative is not arguing. In any argument, he would never reply to her. He would just usually keep quiet. When she fired up on any subject, it was with some surprise, therefore, that she now encountered a firmly set countenance and a resolute pair of eyes. But this time, Joe was very firm. So he gave a firm look and a reply. It was very firm, resolute with a pair of eyes. Sometimes the way you look at the person itself will give them the reply. Women's hearts are not half so hard as men's. I think we have to move on to the next page, children. Yes. Women's hearts are not half so hard as men's. Joe saw by a quick intuition something just told her. She just saw in a quick intuition that his resolute bearing had impressed his wife, and he answered quickly and with real indignation, that is the real feelings in them. Be that as it may, every woman at the funeral turned her eyes steadily from the sick child's face, and when the cart went off with her dead mother, hurried away and left her alone in that old hut with the sun not an hour in the sky. So it was almost the time to sunset. It was almost the time to become dark. So Joe says to his wife, that everybody had left the child unattended. Once the dead body of the mother was taken, she was not at all bothered. So he was not able to leave her like that. Where were John and Kate? Asked Mrs. Thompson. Farmer Jones tossed John into his wagon. Pushed John into wagon and drove off. Katty went home with Mrs. Ellis, but nobody wanted the poor sick one. Send her to the poorhouse was the cry. So he could hear only people telling to send her to be sent to the poorhouse. That's it. Those two siblings of Maggie were taken how he's been told. Why didn't you let her go then? What did you bring her here for? She can't walk to the poorhouse, said Joe. Somebody's arms must carry her, and mine are strong enough for that task. Then why didn't you keep on? Why did you stop here? Demanded the wife. She's asking, why did you come home? Why didn't you take her straight away to the poorhouse? Now, poorhouse is a house, I think I had told you in the previous video also. It's an orphanage, because I am not apt to go on fool's errands. So he says, I am not going to do some useless task. The guardians must first be seen. The people who are responsible in the poorhouse must be contacted first. They must be asked whether she can be admitted or not. And a permit obtained. We have to take a permission also for that. There was no gainsaying this. So it was a sensible answer. So she couldn't reply. When will you see the guardians? Was asked with irrepressible impatience. So she'll ask, when will you see the guardians then? Tomorrow? Why put it off till tomorrow? Go at once for the permit and get the whole thing off your hands tonight. So she wants it to be done immediately. Jane said the wheelwright with an impressiveness of tone that greatly subdued his wife. I read in the Bible sometimes and find much said about little children. How the Savior rebuked the disciples who would not receive them. How he took them up in his arms and blessed them, and how he said that whosoever gave them even a cup of cold water should not go unrewarded. Now it is a small thing for us to keep this poor motherless little one for a single night, to be kind to her for a single night, to make her life comfortable for a single night. So here this paragraph actually speaks about Joe being a God-fearing man. He really fears for God and good deeds. So he says, can't we take care of that little child for a single night, where all these messages or where all these words are put in the Bible itself? Can't we follow it at least for a single night? The voice of the strong, rough man shook, and he turned his head away so that the moisture in his eyes might not be seen. Mrs. Thompson did not answer, but a soft feeling crept into her heart. Look at her kindly, Jane. Speak to her kindly, said Joe. Think of her dead mother and the loneliness, the pain, the sorrow that must be on all her coming life. The softness of his heart gave unwanted eloquence. Unwanted? It's an old fashioned word. It's a persuasive speaking where you persistently go on telling something. It is something unusual or out of order. Eloquence to his lips. Eloquence is words. Mrs. Thompson, yes, I think we have to go on to the next one. Yes, Mrs. Thompson did not reply, but presently turned towards the little chamber where her husband had deposited Maggie, put her to sleep, and pushing open the door went quietly in. Joe did not follow. He saw that her state had changed and felt that it would be best to leave her alone with the child. So he went to his shop, which stood near the house, and worked until dusky evening released him from labor. A light shining through the little chamber windows was the first object that attracted Joe's attention on turning towards the house. It was a good omen. The path led him by this windows, and when opposite, he could not help pausing to look in. It was now dark enough outside to screen him from observation. Maggie lay a little raised on the pillow with the lamp shining full upon her face. Mrs. Thompson was sitting by the bed, talking to the child, but her back was towards the window so that her facial expression was not seen. From Maggie's face, therefore, Joe must read the character of their intercourse. Intercourse here becomes the chat, the conversation. So he is actually happy to see Mrs. Thompson being there for such a long time in the room, keeping the lights on and talking to the child. So now he understands that she has started to have feelings for the child. She has started to grow, having a soft heart. He saw that her eyes were intently fixed upon his wife, that now and then a few words came as if in answers from her lips, that her expressions were sad and tender. But he saw nothing of bitterness or pain. A deep drawn breath of, was followed by one of relief as a weight lifted itself from his heart. On entering, Joe did not go immediately to the little chamber. His heavy tread about the kitchen brought his wife somewhat hurriedly from the room where she had been with Maggie. So once she comes to know that he's come, she will also come down. Joe thought it best not to refer to the child, nor to manifest, nor to ask anything about what was the conversation, any concern in regard to her. How soon will supper be ready? He asked. So he asked, how soon? How long will you take to prepare the dinner? Right soon, answered Mrs. Thompson, beginning to bustle about. There was no asperity in her voice. There was no harshness. She wasn't in that earlier tone when she started with actually. So that shows that she has started to change a little. After washing from his hands and face the dust and soil of work, Joe left the kitchen and went to the little bedroom. A pair of large bright eyes looked up at him from the snowy bed, looked at him tenderly, gratefully, pleadingly, as though she was asking for some help. How his heart swelled in his bosom from right from the bottom. With what a quicker motion came the heartbeats. Joe sat down and now, for the first time, examining the thin frame carefully under the lamplight, saw that it was an attractive face. The girl was actually good looking and full of a childish sweetness. He was so carried away with the innocent look of the child, which suffering had not been able to obliterate, which the suffering actually was not able to remove that innocence from her face. Obliterate, remove. Your name is Maggie, he said, as he sat down and took her soft little hand in his. Yes, sir. Her voice struck a chord that quivered, shivered, or shaken in a low strain of music. Yes. Have you been sick long? Have you been sick long? Yes, sir. What a sweet patience was in her tone. Has the doctor been to see you? He used to come, but not lately. No, sir. Have you any pain? Sometimes, but not now. When had you pain? This morning my side ached and my back hurt when you carried me. It hurts you to be lifted or moved about? Yes, sir. Your side doesn't ache now? No, sir. Does it ache a great deal? Yes, sir. But it hasn't ached any since I've been on this soft bed. The soft bed feels good? Oh, yes, sir. So good. What a satisfaction mingled with gratitude was in her voice. Supper's ready, said Mrs. Thompson, looking into the room a little while afterwards. Joe glanced from his wife's face to that of Maggie. She understood him and answered, She can wait until we are done. Then I will bring her something to eat. There was an effort at indifference on the part of Mrs. Thompson, but her husband had seen her through the window and understood that the coldness was assumed, put on. The coldness had actually gone. Joe waited, after sitting down on the table for his wife to introduce the subject uppermost in both of their thoughts, but she kept silent on that theme for many minutes and he maintained a like reverse, so he also didn't speak about anything at all. At last, she said abruptly, What are you going to do with that child? I thought you understood me that she was to go to the poorhouse, replied Joe, as if surprised at her question. Mrs. Thompson looked rather strangely at her husband for sonic moments. Sonic moments? Those slow, quiet moments, and then dropped her eyes. The subject was not again referred to during the meal. At its close, Mrs. Thompson toasted a slice of bread and softened it with milk and butter. Adding to this a cup of tea, she took them into Maggie and held the small waiter on which she had placed them while the hungry child ate with every sign of pleasure. She relished the meal. Is it good? Asked Mrs. Thompson, seeing with what a keen relish the food was taken. Relish? To taste it. Child paused with the cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude that awoke to new life old human feelings which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. Half a score of years becomes 10 years here. So, since 10 years, she had actually not experienced such good feeling because they were childless. So, now she's actually feeling it. We'll keep her a day or two longer. She's so weak and helpless, said Mrs. Joe Thompson in answer to her husband's remark at breakfast time on the next morning, that he must step down and see the guardians to the poor about Maggie. She'll be so much in your way, said Joe. So he says, It's okay, you take care. I should not mind that for a day or two, poor thing. So she says, Maybe for another 2 or 3 days it is okay. Joe did not see the guardians of the poor on that day, on the next, nor on the day following. In fact, he never saw them at all on Maggie's account. For in less than a week, Mrs. Joe Thompson would as soon leave thought of taking up her own abode. Her own abode is house, in the almshouse, as sending Maggie there. She did not think of sending Maggie at all. Almshouse, the helping house. Now, this paragraph, the last paragraph, that is what light, is spoken by the uh, author itself. He says, What light and blessing did that sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson, the poor wheelwright? It had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time, just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself, and so became sore, irritable, ill-tempered, and self-afflicting in the desolation of her woman's nature. So, being a woman, she had actually lost all these qualities in her. She had become totally a different woman, a different lady, because there was nobody for her to take care of or show love for. Now, all these characters in her have come back. Now the sweetness of that sick child looking ever to her in love, patience, and gratitude was as honey to her soul. So it was honey to her soul. And she carried her in her heart as well as in her arms, a precious burden. Now, did you understand how it becomes a precious burden to them? Though she is a burden, she is very precious. They love taking or carrying the burden. As for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all the neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. So here it is wine of life, that is happiness in life. There wasn't anybody else around him. He felt that I am the happiest person now in this world. An angel had come into his house. An angel disguised as a sick. An angel was there in disguise as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, and filled all its dreary, dark chambers with the sunshine of love. So it was completely filled with the love as a sunshine in the chamber. That is the love of the child, the love of these two people towards the child. Let's move on to the next part of the lesson. That is, how apt is the title. Arthur's story, An Angel in Disguise, is all about a little crippled orphan girl called Maggie and how she brought back joy and happiness to the childless Thompson family. Though she was a sick, helpless, and miserable child at the beginning of the story, in the end, she filled the lives of Joe and Jane Thompson with the sunshine of love. Maggie turned out to be an angel in disguise for the Thompson family. Again, when the girl was unattended after her mother's death and was in a sad state, Joe Thompson reached to her as an angel in disguise, took her to his home, and gave her a completely new life. From both angles, the title is symbolic and suggestive of the theme of the story. Thus, the title of the story, An Angel in Disguise, is just and apt. Now, theme. An Angel in Disguise summary theme. The story has a symbolic title. The main theme of the story is that people can change and can get emotionally attached to others. It depicts love, kindness, and human feelings. Now, what was the setting in Angel in Disguise, which is a short story written in 1851 by American author T.S. Arthur's story takes place sometime in the 19th century, somewhere in rural America, in a small agrarian village where agriculture takes a vital role. A mother has just died, leaving three orphan children. Now, what is the style? An Angel in Disguise, with its strong vocabulary, complex sentences, very complex sentences. If you have observed, each sentence has a strong word, and all the sentences are not the simple one. They are all complex one and compound one. Realistic setting and vivid point of view stresses on the importance of love and care in one's life. How love drives out even the darkest and deepest bitterness out of a person. It's written in third person from an unknown narrator's perspective. Now let us see what are the devices, literary devices used in general, how it can be connected. In order to reveal the main idea and render the general mood of the passage vividly is differently and convincingly, the author of the analyzed passage resorts to the following devices, that is, come to a conclusion. He comes to an end for the devices. Metaphor is widely used in the story. Some examples are idleness, vice, and intemperance done their work, death touches, pity took the place of anger, a fall from a window had injured her spine, sad eyes and patient face touched many hearts, soft feeling crept into her heart. The author used metaphor to embody some feelings, some lifeless things in alive and make them more vivid. To show the sad atmosphere of the story, the author's stylistic device, which is of great importance, the novel is the epithet. Now the epithet. Miserable work, undisciplined thing, puzzled air, painful effort, saintly temper, soft feeling, unwanted eloquence, hurried air. The epithets are used to depict strong emotions of characters. Now, simile. Gentle is almost of a woman, as if in answers from lips, as a weight lifted itself from his heart, as if surprised at her question. Now, as for syntactical devices, that is the framing of the sentences, the text contains ellipses. The poorhouse is a sad place for a sick and helpless child. For your child or mine, how soon will supper be ready? Right soon. Device is used in the dialogues as it is typical of conversational language. Now, inversion in the question. Your name is Maggie? Polly Syndeton. These are slide devices, children, which has been used in all the sentences. That is how it becomes a complex sentence. You can remember those which you remember. For example, that is metaphor and simile and alliteration. The rest you can understand. Allusion. Whosoever gave them even a cup of cold water should not go unrewarded. Such an expression was taken from the Bible. The author wanted us to understand the seriousness of Joe Thompson's doings and sayings. Now, the repetition of words such as score, irritable, ill-tempered, and self-afflicting, dark and cold and miserable shows us the state the wheelwright's was before the child appeared in her life. And there is also alliteration. For example, she had fallen upon the threshold of her own in a drunken fit. The sound R is classified as frightening. It creates sad and negative emotions. The author used it to demonstrate the miserableness of the children's mother. Hyphenation is also happened in the text. Tomorrow, tonight, double hyphenation. She understood him and answered, she can wait until we are done. The double hyphenation is used to lay an emphatic stress on summing up the analysis of the given text. One should say that Timothy Shea Arthur brilliantly used all the stylistic devices mentioned above, which helped to reveal the main character's nature and to create a true-to-life atmosphere of the events depicted. The author compelled us to feel and experience the life of the characters. Yes, I think we are done with the lesson, children. You can read the explanation of all the devices given once again for yourself very slowly to understand and mark it in the text also so that it will help you for your answers and your extracts. Hope you will read the textbook again and understand the lesson properly. Thank you, children.